We're live.
Good evening, YouTube. Good evening, YouTube. Let me pull up some slides. Right, I'm going to start my screen share with a quick introduction and hand you swiftly over to Jamie Bradley, who's going to be talking Jamstack. I need Alex to allow me to share my screen, though. Every week, same. Cheers. This one is my browser. All right, so good to see you all here, and hello to those of you I can't see who are out there on YouTube. It's good to have you with us on this wonderfully sunny day. I've just ran back home to catch the call, so if I look a bit out of breath and hot, that might be why. Usual stuff. I mean, if there's only Scott here, but we ask people to keep themselves muted on Zoom, but we don't worry about that too much. We'll skip the camera stuff and we'll go straight to the next slide, which will be that we are recording this. So again, camera stuff. Scott, don't show yourself if you don't want to be on the YouTube recording. Okay, so coming up, we have Jez Higgins, I think, with a Journey into Space on July the 2nd. And then a little birdie tells me we may have some more React events coming up.
We do have them penciled in. They're just not. They're not in.
Not in yet. Not confirmed. Not on the slides, but
no. But there will be every week of July.
Just to kind of pique your interest. There'll be some more front-endy React JavaScripty stuff coming in the near future. Don't forget, every Friday at 5:30 we run the Virtual Social Club on Zoom right here, which tends to run for a couple of hours or significantly longer, depending on how people are feeling. But it's good fun. Feel free to drop in at any time. It doesn't matter if you can't make it at 5:30. We'll be around until we're not, in which case you'll arrive in an empty room. Discord is a vibrant and growing community now, well over 100 members. Highly recommend you quickly whip out your phone and scan this QR code. But if not, actually, where can people find the Discord? It's a mystery. It's not on the website yet, is it?
It's not on the website, but it's on the Twitters, it's on the LinkedIn, it's on the Facebooks.
Yeah, so it's on all the other socials. So I recommend joining the Discord.
I'll drop a link in live chat as well.
Yeah, do that. That'd be sweet. So shout outs, I guess it's a quiet one this week. So we'll skip. Oh, do you have something? Drum roll. You're on mute in case you're speaking.
I'm desperately searching through my notepad. I do have a shout out. It'll come at the end. Sorry.
Okay. Shout outs revisited at the end. If you've got any questions, drop them in the live chat. We'll keep an eye out for those and get them over to Jamie at a convenient time. And failing that, we'll get on with it. Over to Jamie, who's going to be telling us about his work with Jamstack apps and managing his diabetes. So over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. Let's see how we get on here.
There you go.
Sure.
Oh, hang on. Share screen. And you want that one. Okay. Oh, this stuff makes me feel really nervous. There we go. Can you see a big slide now?
Yeah, looks good.
Managing diabetes with Jamstack. And you can probably see can you see the camera as well on the right hand side? Is that in the way?
No.
You can't see that, so you can't see yourselves. That's great. Okay, brilliant. So hello everyone. Thanks very much for coming along and listening to me talk today. My name is Jamie Bradley. I'm a front-end developer, and I'm talking to you today from Middlesbrough over in the northeast of England. And I'm also a type 1 diabetic. And today I would like to talk to you about how I started to manage type 1 diabetes with a popular web development architecture called Jamstack. So if you would like to catch me on Twitter after the talk, then please feel free, find me at jamiebradley234. I also have a website, which is jamiebradley.dev. Now on my blog or on my website, there's quite an in-depth article about this kind of journey that I've been on. I would highly recommend having a look at that if you're quite interested in it, because there's only so much I can go through in these meetup talks. And again, it's on Dev2 as well, the same article. So you can hit me up on there if you have any questions, or I will join the Discord as well. So I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit of a story. So on the 23rd of December 2003 is the day that I was diagnosed with diabetes. I was 14-year-old, and it was pretty crap, to be honest. It was 2 days before Christmas. So thankfully I didn't spend Christmas Day in hospital. But I was a little bit scared. I'd basically started to develop symptoms of type 1 diabetes, and this tends to be drastic weight loss, go to the toilet a lot, sickness, that kind of thing. And it was actually my grandmother that kind of pushed me to go to the doctors to get tested, and I got tested, and I had a blood sugar of 32. So to give you an idea of what that is in kind of like general terms, a healthy individual would have a blood sugar of less than, I would say, around 7. So I was way above the scale. And that kind of takes me on to this thing, like, what is diabetes? Like, what does that mean? And diabetes is a lifelong condition that causes a person's blood sugar level to become too high. So don't worry, this talk is not going to be like heavily biological. It's not like a biology session at school, but it's important to understand the problems that diabetes brings in order to understand why the application was developed. So there are 2 types of diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2, and the one that I've highlighted here is the one that I suffer with, which is type 1. Now, everyone has, well, I presume everyone has a pancreas, and a healthy individual will have a working pancreas, which can produce an enzyme called insulin. Now, you probably go about this as on a daily basis without even thinking about it. Let's say, for argument's sake, you were eating a pizza. You would eat the pizza. Along comes a handful of nutrients, big one being carbohydrates, and your body will take these carbohydrates and convert them into glucose. The glucose is then basically passed around in your bloodstream, and what a healthy individual will do is they will release insulin from their pancreas and convert that glucose into energy, and it gets distributed amongst cells. A diabetic, or in this case a type 1 diabetic who can't produce any insulin whatsoever, is unable to do that. So the sugars in the blood builds up, and that's how you get ill. A type 2 diabetic is slightly different. They have a pancreas that is able to produce insulin, but not a healthy amount of insulin. And this is actually tends to be brought on from a wide range of factors, but more commonly it tends to be kind of like lifestyle. So if someone is diagnosed with what we call pre-diabetes, which is kind of like the start of type 2 diabetes becoming a thing, it can be reversible with drastic lifestyle changes. And you might have seen it's kind of a hot topic on the BBC at the moment. There's been a few TV shows where people have been like put into like intense camps where they eat 500 calories a day for 2 weeks, and they have drastic weight loss, and they can basically reverse their diabetes. So it can be done, but with a type 1 diabetic, unfortunately, it can't. So why does the body do this for type 1 diabetics? And the main reason is unknown, but the actual cause of it is because the body gets a little bit confused. Its autoimmune system basically attacks the beta cells in the pancreas, thinking that it's an antibody, and as a result, your immune system actually kills off your own beta cells. So, cheers, body, that's great. But as we've kind of been through, you know, these cells are required to produce the insulin, which we need to distribute glucose as energy across, and we can't. And that little point at the bottom there kind of alludes to what I said earlier about, you know, things like symptoms. You go for a wee a lot when you start to develop type 1 diabetes, because your body is using your kidneys to get rid of that extra glucose. And I've had like people text me or ring me and say, oh, Jamie, I've been to the toilet about 6 times today. Have I got diabetes? And it's like, by all means, I'm not saying if you go to the toilet a little bit more regular than normal, then you've got it. But to give you an idea of what it was like when I was diagnosed, I would literally have a pint of water every 10 minutes, constantly throughout the day. And obviously there's a lot of water being, like, you know, taken in. And again, this is because your body needs to stay hydrated to flush it out. So you were literally on the loo every 15 minutes or something. It becomes annoying. So you would definitely know when it happens. So is diabetes a dangerous disease? And I've got a couple of statistics that I'd like to go through just to kind of quickly answer that question. So in the UK, these are the latest statistics that have come from a charity called Diabetes UK. 4.7 million people in the UK have diabetes. That's not just type 1, that's across the board. And someone is diagnosed with diabetes every 2 minutes. And because of the scale of diabetes, the NHS is spending at least £10 billion a year on diabetes. So if you break that down, that's £19,000 a minute. And it's hard to even comprehend like how that's possible. But yeah, it's you know, it's a very, very big amount of money. And the number of diabetics is going up and up and up. In fact, in the last 20 years, the figure has increased by 80%. So that's a terrifying figure. And if you think about the economical factors here, if that number's going up and up and up, and this is what we're spending at the moment, there's nothing to say that in another 20 years, unless we do something about it, we can't. That fee is going to double. And people with diabetes are twice as likely to be admitted to hospital. So again, diabetics are likely to need the NHS more than a non-diabetic, if you will. Now, type 1 diabetes also brings some added risk to other aspects of health. A type 1 diabetic is more than 4 times as likely to have a heart attack, 4.5 times more likely to experience heart failure, and 3.5 times more likely to have a stroke. And this again is kind of down to the implications that come from high blood sugar. So it's really important that diabetics control their blood sugars effectively and try and keep those numbers as low as possible. The thing that always gets me is that in the moment, you don't think about these like long-term implications. So, if you've got a blood of 15, it's quite easy to think, oh, it's fine, it's just a one-off. But if that keeps happening over and over again, like, it'll catch up on you within about 20 years and something's happened. So that's another scary thing about it. It's quite hard to, because it's not like an immediate thing that happens, it's quite hard to forget what the potential risks would be. And finally, someone with diabetes is 20 times more likely to experience an amputation than someone without diabetes. And the reason for this is because when it gets to this point, more than likely the diabetes is being managed quite badly, and this causes problems with blood circulation. So what tends to happen is blood can't get to an individual's feet. So you get things like ulcers, infections, and the only way to fix it is to take it off. So yeah, it results in an amputation. And I've seen it quite often. I've been to a few I go to like diabetes clinic every 6 months, and more often than not, you do start to see people coming in wheelchairs where they've just had a recent amputation, and it's quite an eye opener. So yeah, diabetes is quite dangerous, but it can be treated. It's not like you've got it and that's it, game over. It's all about trying to regulate those blood sugars. And the way that we treat type 1 diabetes, so the remainder of the talk now is very much focused on type 1 because I have no idea how type 2 works. I think you take tablets and you manage it with diet, but I'm quite keen to hear more about it. So if anyone wants to talk to me about this offline, that'd be great. But from like, say, my perspective, when I was first diagnosed with diabetes, I took insulin injections, and the picture on the left hand side, the biggest one here, is an example of what that looks like. You have a little pen that literally looks like a pen that you write with, and it has a cartridge of insulin, and you just pinch your skin on your stomach or arm, leg, and inject. And you have to calculate how much insulin you need to take based on what you're eating and what your blood sugar count is. And to do a blood sugar count, you do a test, which is what the top right hand picture is. This is a person who's pricked their finger and they've taken a test and put it onto the strip, and this machine would give you like a count of how much sugar is in your blood at the time. So I have one. I couldn't find like a picture of this one. It's a lot more modern now than that one is. It's a USB, so I can plug it into the computer. I can download reports off it. It's great, really good. And finally, on the bottom right hand side, this is a fantastic piece of kit, which I've fortunately been very lucky enough to get on the NHS because of some complications I've had with my diabetes. But this is called an insulin pump. I don't know if we can see this on the camera, but this is like the equivalent of an injection, but it's stuck to you for about three days a week. It comes in a little cannula, so I've got it on my arm here, there, and I can change that, put it around every 3 days. And then on the picture there's another device on the left hand side, and this is called a CGM. one of these, a continuous glucose monitor. So what happens is this goes into the skin. There's a little needle, and it puts in like a little chip that sits in some fluid just below the skin, and that fluid can pick up blood sugar readings. So what this device is doing is every minute it's picking up a reading and then transmitting it to that pump that I just showed you via Bluetooth. So I can see like what my blood sugars are like throughout the day over a course of 24 hours. And the machine that I've just been given, which was about 6 months ago, has something called auto mode on it. So just to add to that, I now have 70% of a pancreas, basically. This machine is constantly checking my blood sugars and sending this data over to the machine and then transmitting insulin as and when I need it for 70% of the time. And we say 70% of the time because whenever I have a meal, I have to tell the machine how much insulin I need, because obviously it can't see. So I have to tell it. So this is all like really good, you know, and it's nice if you can get it, because the better the treatment is, the smaller the chances are that things are going to go wrong, you know, because we can tweak these really fine things. And treatment is improved by analysing test results, spotting trends, and making the changes. Now, I have a machine here that's basically doing this for me. Like it's got an algorithm that's determining what my bloods are going to do. It predicts, and then it'll say like, oh, well, we need to change it this and that. And you can't always do that. It's really expensive. So just to give you an idea of how much this costs, the CGM itself, the little white thing here, that's £500 for one unit, and it has a lifespan of a year. So every year I have to renew that. That there's a little grey transmitter that gets attached to that. You get 4 of them in a box, and they last a week per one. One box costs £200, so that's we're nearly at £2,500 a year, just for the transmitters. So let's, for argument's sake, say we're at £3,000 there, and then the machine itself, the insulin pump, £3,000 again. So there's £6,000 worth of kit there, which I don't pay for myself. It comes from the National Health Service. But if you take into account people overseas, people in America, other countries that don't have the luxury that we have of the national health, they are going to struggle to afford this kind of thing. And I had an interesting chat with someone on a Slack community recently. His wife is a diabetic researcher, and he was telling me that there are people over in America at the moment, because of the whole COVID-19 epidemic, and loss of jobs, things like that, no healthcare insurance, they're actually starting to ration insulin because they can't afford to get more insulin. So, you know, people with diabetes are actually dying over in like, you know, we're not talking like, you know, about poor countries per se, you know, in the United States, but so it's really important that we take the NHS for granted. I know it's quite easy to join a queue at your GPs and complain that you're having to wait 5 minutes, but I mean, my God, we would be in a very, very different situation if we didn't have this. So that side, anyway, sorry, I've kind of went on a bit of a tangent there. So we have the technology there to improve that. The other alternative is to download some apps. Some are really good, but they want you to pay for it, and that's fine. You know, I understand how business works. I run a business myself, but I don't like the idea of monetizing off something that can't be helped. So the idea of making money off diabetics feels a bit wrong to me. And the other alternative is the good old-fashioned way of a logbook. So the little screenshot in the top right is kind of looks very similar to what I got when I was first diagnosed. You basically write down what your blood sugar was before you eat, how much insulin you took, what your carbohydrates were, and then what your blood sugars were afterwards. And imagine that sheet filled with loads of numbers. It's really hard to see a trend of any kind. So earlier this year, I said to myself, I was going to build a open source application that would be driven by a community, diabetics, non-diabetics, but mainly developers, that would avoid this idea of in-app purchases for any kind of application, mobile app, web app. It would need to be easy to host, and it would need to be easy to deploy. So it would be a self-hosted application, much like what you would do with something like WordPress. It would need to be secure, and it would need to be fast. So now we're going to start getting onto the tech stuff. So thanks very much for persevering with me over the diabetic talk. And this is why I turned to this architecture called Jamstack. Now, I'm not sure if people watching are really familiar with the architecture, but I'm kind of assuming that you've heard of it. As a very, very brief high-level overview, Jamstack is an acronym that stands for JavaScript APIs Markup. And the idea behind it is that you would develop a website that is built with JavaScript. It would communicate with an API, and it would contain pre-rendered markup. So it's a static website, effectively. And the benefit of doing this application in such an architecture means that it would be fast, because it's just going to generate static content that the user needs to see. We don't have to do database requests at runtime, because that's all of that data is being acquired as part of the prefetching process. It's easy to host because the website's static. We can just chuck it on a CDN. It can be on any CDN that we want. But you'll see on the next slide the kind of services that I've used to build this application. And then because we've, abstracted away that direct communication with databases and things, the site is actually more secure, because the only thing that the user's really interacting with is just markup. So the application that I wanted to create, it looks a little bit like this, and it's don't all shout at once over my iPad's drawings. But the idea is that a individual would be able to go to a GitHub repository, and they would be able to deploy the two aspects of the application. There is a backend, which is developed with a system called Sanity, which is a tool for managing and creating structured content. And then there's a service called Netlify, which is what we would use to host the application. And the front end part of the website is built using Gatsby. And the reason why I've decided to take these technologies to build the application is because Sanity lets you design and develop the schema for your content through plugins. So that means if I need to roll out updates to the schema, then a developer or the user can just run a yarn upgrade or an npm upgrade, and they'll get all of the schema changes. They won't have to mess on with Git. Likewise, on Gatsby gives you this idea of using something called a Gatsby theme. So if you have some core functionality, you can include that into your Gatsby website as an npm package. And again, I can just distribute that through npm, all of the updates. And that was the main reason for going with these technologies, and they're pretty good as well, to be fair. Now, at the moment, the application it's sort of like a little bit rough around the edges. It's quite tedious to get started. It takes about 10 minutes to deploy all of these services. But I am in the process of working with Sanity to use their Create tool, and I've put a little link to it there at the bottom left. The idea is that you would go onto that site, you would connect to your GitHub account, you would click a button, and then it would basically do all of that on the screen for you. So we're about 75% of the way there. Once it's there, it'll be awesome. So yeah, the benefits of this approach, I've kind of covered a few of these already, but easy to deploy and host. With the exception of now, once the Sanity Create stuff's finished, easy to manage because of the upgrades. It'll be open source. It's an easy to use application, or at least I want it to be easy to use. I want it to be easy to customize. So that's again another benefit of using the Gatsby theme approach. Although you've got my theme, you can actually extend upon that theme. So you can do whatever you want with it. You can do whatever you want with your data. It'll be secure, it'll be fast. And then these are the bits that I really like about it. It means that people now have a way of making their data easy to share with a healthcare professional. So there's nothing worse than going to an appointment with a consultant at the hospital, and they'll say what happened with this result when it was 20? And you're like, oh, it was about 2 weeks ago, and I can't remember. And you find yourself you think you remember what happened, but you don't, and it all comes together. Why not just have an application where you could flag that blood result at that point, and you can put a note on, and you can say, right, I felt ill this day and my bloods were high. And then at least the doctor can help you paint out a picture so that you understand what to do next time and such. That falls onto the next point. It's easy to visualize data and spot trends. And an application like this would really make a difference to the way you manage diabetes. And I say that it's built by a diabetic, so it's built by me for other diabetics, but there is nothing to say that other people can't get involved. And what's been really cool is that the application's been live about a month, and we've already had like people starting to star the repository and make contribution to documentation, which has been really nice. So on that, my application's called Hey Sugar, and there's a website here called heysugar.health, which you can go to. It's a really rough website. Developed with a static site generator called Eleventy, which I would highly recommend if you ever get a chance to have a look at it. It's a nice tool. And the GitHub repository is there. Now, word of caution, this thing's changing all the time. It's very, very alpha. I still haven't figured out things myself. If there's any diabetics watching that download the application, have a look at it, and you find something obvious that I've missed, please raise an issue on GitHub, because that has happened, and that's the whole point of the project at the end of the day. That's how we make it really good. So what I'm going to do is I'll bring the slides back up in a minute, but I'm just going to stop this and I'm going to show you the application, and hopefully the demo gods will be okay with us today. Let's just put do not disturb on, because we don't want notifications coming up. There we go. So, all right. So Hey Sugar as an application looks like this. This is a very rough example, a little bit like Art Attack. It's one I made earlier. And when you visit Hey Sugar for the first time, you will get a dashboard like this. In fact, I think I did a build just before we finished. So let me just make sure that's, there we go, brilliant. So the things that you get from the application, you can see that it's telling you what your average blood sugar is over the last 30 days, how many hyper results you've had. So hyper, for people who don't know, is where your sugars are too high, and a hypo is where your sugars are too low. And these parameters are set as settings inside of the Sanity application. We have this graph, which I've developed with a React chart library. And I really wanted to show you this because when we talk about painting this picture, there's a little bit of a bug, I must be honest, where that 4.7 should be on the left-hand side, because that should be the most recent one. But you can kind of see like a pattern that's forming. And I basically did a blood test about an hour before this talk, and as I was checking it, I could see that my blood sugars were starting to drop. It'll probably be a bit clearer on the table here. You can see that when we look here at 15:55, I had 40 grams of carbohydrates and I took this much insulin. And then you can see that it was starting to drop down to 4.8 within an hour afterwards. So that's a nice way of being able to see that, the bloods are starting to drop. Now, once you've been to this screen, the next thing you can do, let's take that one, for example, you can go into a reading and you'll get this kind of interface. So the idea here is that you can pass any notes in. So this is the thing that I mentioned before about like any notes you might want to leave with your GP or your consultant. There'll be a meal table, which is what basically shows how many carbohydrates you had in the meal that you had, how much insulin you took, what the date at the time was, and whether it was before or after a meal, what the result was, and then mood. Now, it's interesting, you might be sat there thinking, well, why would you need to put the mood in? And there's a handful of like different things that can impact a person's blood sugars. Things like, are you stressed? Do you feel anxious? Are you ill? If you're a lady, are you on your period? These things that make hormonal changes and hormonal imbalances in our bodies actually impact our blood sugars. What's a really interesting one? If you've had like a competitive game of something like squash, if you've played like a really hard game of squash, your blood sugars can actually spike because of an adrenaline rush. So that's happened to me a few times because I'm a squash player. And I've come off the court, I've done a blood test and my bloods have been 20. So I've been like, oh, wow, I need to do something about that. Take some insulin. And then next thing I know, I've had a hypo, which is where you've had too much insulin and your bloods drop. And the reason being is because it was kind of like a red herring. Like there was no need to correct that. It would just come down naturally. So these are all like little factors that you need to kind of bear in mind, as well as living with a disease. So yeah, it can be quite a difficult thing. And that was one of the main drivers behind this application is, a way to be able to kind of track and log all of these different factors for people to use. Now, the application is hosted on an instance of Netlify, so here's our dashboard for Netlify, and you can see that every time I make a, well, let me show you. If we were to create an entry, I'm not okay. Yeah, to make it interesting, I'll do a blood test like as I'm using it. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to put a strip in. Don't worry, it takes like 3 seconds. I won't be taking up people's time. You don't need to get a coffee or anything. So I've got the blood. Sorry if you're squeamish, and then I've put it into the machine there. So what you'll be able to see now is that it's doing a countdown: 4, 3, 2, 1. Might be high. So that's 6.8. So I'm pretty happy with that. That's good. Considering I'm really hot and sweating and nervous. So I'm going to put the blood sugar in at 6.8 here. I'm not taking any insulin. This is the time's wrong. So there's a bug. I'll get that logged. But we'll say 7:30. And I'm going to say I'm nervous, actually. That's there somewhere because I'm in the middle of a talk and I am a little bit nervous. It wasn't around a meal time. I didn't take any alcohol. So alcohol's a big one. So diabetics who are going to go out on and have a few drinks, that can actually be quite dangerous if it's not taken care of properly. So when I was younger and I didn't understand how to handle this kind of thing, I had a few seizures as a result of alcohol. And that's as a result of your blood sugars actually dropping to a very dangerous level, like a reading of like less than 2. That's when it starts getting really dangerous. And the reason being is because similar to the squash incident where I thought, I've got high blood sugars and I need to take some insulin. With alcohol, you'll drink alcohol and there'll be sugars in it and things which send your blood sugars really high, but alcohol itself is actually a catalyst of sugar. So once alcohol's in your bloodstream, it breaks the sugars down. So if you've taken more insulin than what your body actually has, then it results in basically too big of a drop. And then more than likely you've had more drink than you actually should have had, and you won't realize that you're going to go into this state. So you stay unconscious and then the seizure happens. I've had a few. I've had a really bad one which resulted in surgery on my shoulder and things, and I wouldn't really recommend it. So yeah, be careful. If you're diabetic and you're going out drinking, don't take insulin and have plenty of food. So I'm going to publish that. And then what we'll see now is that Netlify should pick up that instruction and we can see that a build's been triggered. And that's happened because I've basically set up something called a build hook in Netlify. And if you're not familiar with that, you can do that in here. And we can see here that I've got the tracker update, and this is the API endpoint that needs to be called. So inside of my sanity tracker, I've said, here's a webhook and I want you to call it whenever some content updates. So what's going to happen now is that Netlify is going to be making requests over to our Sanity Studio, pulling all of that data in, and then Gatsby is going to do its thing, convert that data into the JavaScript, and then generate some static HTML, and then that's what will be produced on our tracker here. So eventually what we'll see is that there'll be a new entry on this chart that we can look at. So that's the application, and I'm just going to quickly jump back to the slides because I'm using my iPad as a second screen and it's just warned me that I've got less than 10% battery, so I should really get to here. So what's next for the application? Well, it's obviously still very early days, but I do want to take this further. This version of Hey Sugar is cumbersome, it's very long-winded, but it's meant to be a bit of a proof of concept, and it's meant to be a feeler to put it out there, see if people want to use it and see if people are actually interested in it. What I would like to do next is to create a platform that doesn't require this kind of setup to start with. It is very much a case of just sign up and you have that interface there without the need for deployment. Everything's fetched at runtime and things like that via an API. And I'm going to try and collaborate with charities like Diabetes UK and other organizations to see if they would like back the project to make that happen. So that should be really exciting. And then another thing that I've started to get requests for, not so much from people in the UK, it's quite interesting. I don't think we really have things like this, but from people overseas, they keep asking me if I'll ever consider integrating the application with a series of third-party services, and I've never really heard of them. So that's quite an exciting prospect, that the possibility of maybe trying to incorporate hardware into the system and things like that. So that's quite cool. So yeah, there's certainly some possibilities there. But yeah, thanks very much for coming along to my talk. That's pretty much everything. I'm not sure how Sean and Alex are going to deal with questions, but I'm happy to do some now if there's any ready to go. If not, I'll try and get onto the discourse and you can try and post some over my way or whatnot, or just follow me on Twitter. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. That was really
Yeah, nice.
interesting, and there was no need to excuse the diabetes intro as well. It was fascinating.
That's good then. I didn't want people to have flashbacks to, you know, secondary school biology and
no, it gave the whole project a kind of a story behind it and a point to it, you know, and kind of which often, you know, helps understand the point of it, you know.
Yeah, well, I didn't want it to be too much of like an awareness thing, but it is kind of like part of the point of the talk, really. You know, I think people don't, and rightly so, because unless you have it, you're never going to know these kind of things. But I think it's important to kind of hit home about how much of an impact that the disease has on the NHS, especially type 2 diabetes, where it is a reversible thing, or it can be avoided. Like, you know, I think it's just a case of making people aware. Obviously type 1, you just get it, it's like a potluck thing. But yeah, you know, type 2 is certainly something that can be addressed. So yeah.
So would the application still be useful for type 2? So I assume it's still tracking sugar levels and things. So
yeah, it would. So this is one of the reasons why I'm quite keen to hear from people who like live with type 2 to understand how the medication works. So at the moment, Hey Sugar is very much geared towards an insulin user, but it can still be used by a type 2 diabetic, because as far as I'm aware, the majority of the time you control it with diet and you control it with tablets. So depending on how your blood sugars come out, with us, the consultant would say, make these changes to your insulin. I imagine with a type 2, they would say, okay, we're going to up your medication strength, and then that'll help. That'll help shift things along. So I think it could still be useful because it has the food tracker in there, you know, where you can add all of the carbohydrates and things. And then it also, that's actually something that I forgot to share. Am I okay to quickly share the screen again? Is that all right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I went off track a little bit there. So yeah, so inside of the system, you can see the screen, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So one of the things that that kind of hit home in at least over in my clinic as well is that like routine is a good thing, and I've found that over the years as well. Like if I have like unpredicted weeks, so even when it comes to diet, like if I'm going to have a week where I'll have about 3 or 4 takeaways, then my blood sugars are going to be terrible, because like there's just no consistency, especially since I've moved on to this automatic mode where the you know, the algorithm's like looking 5 days ahead every time. So if you have a week where you're like this every week, then the next week the machine's going to think that's what it needs to do. So consistency is key with this thing. And one of the things that I tried to make easy was this idea of like creating a food bank. So inside of the records here, you can add a meal or a snack, and you can either pick a new food or you can pick from a collection of existing foods. And this is one of the reasons why I really like the Sanity platform. So I mean, I know we're talking about blood sugars and things like that, but at the end of the day, these are just documents. So you can imagine that this would be like a content management system. So if you have like a collection of categories, or like when we do the Middlesbrough front end website, we use Sanity. We have a collection of speakers. So if we ever have a speaker that comes back, they've got a profile in the system. And that's how this works. It uses the I think it's called a reference field. So for argument's sake, if we just look at creating some like a lunch entry, I always have a ham and cheese sandwich. Always. And I'll put that as lunch.
Oh, now I'm hungry.
Do you ever toast it?
Sometimes I do, yeah, if I'm feeling a bit dairy.
Nice.
So one of the reasons why I like to have this is because I know exactly how many carbohydrates are in it, and it's just a lot easier for me to do the carb counting side of things. So my portion always equates to 40 grams of carbohydrates. So if I was to create a new reading in here, for argument's sake, let's say it's now bloods of that, I know that I'm going to take a roundabout because the machine delivers it for me. But if I was on my old pen terms, I would say that's 4 units. I could basically come into here and pick it from my list of foods instead of having to type all that out again.
Yeah.
And then you can pass a nice little picture in if you want to, and things just to add like a little bit of flavor to the front end. So then when you come through to the table, you would see like the picture there. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because I thought it was a nice piece of functionality from the Sanity point of view. And then when we talked about the parameters of these boxes here around like what the high result should be and what a low result should be, there is a settings page here where you can put this kind of information in. So what is interesting is that in other parts of the world, I think it's mainly America, you would measure in a different like unit for blood sugars, so you can switch that inside of the settings. So just in case there's any US friends looking at this video today, then that's there if you want it. And we can set the high limit and the low limit here, which is what basically determines like how many results are going to fall into these equivalent categories. And then what I also forgot to mention is that this average blood sugar is really good, because what a diabetic would need to do as part of their management is they'll get something called a HbA1c, which is like a hemoglobin count. It's like a blood test. And what the doctors will do is they'll take that HbA1c result and determine like what your average blood sugar's been over a period of time. So that's what this is trying to reflect. It'll take all of the information that's got in the system and then calculate an average, so you can have an idea of like where you are. And again, this will be color coded. So if you had like an average blood sugar of 11, it knows that you're above your high limit, so it's going to go red, that kind of thing. But yeah. So that's that one.
That's really cool. It's really cool. There were a couple of questions coming actually.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah.
Okay, the first one from Simon. He says, just to focus on the Jamstack side of things, how do you convey the main points of Jamstack to customers whose websites are still dynamic?
Oh yeah. So this is it's a challenge that I'm faced with like quite a lot. And I'm actually trying to position my agency as a Jamstack agency, and I'm still trying to figure that one out. But mainly, it's kind of, for me, it's like the key 3 points: security, performance, and scalability, and I suppose like costing as well. So the idea of the cheap. We say cheap hosting, we don't mean like a cheap and nasty server. It's cheap because it's a CDN, so it doesn't cost much to run. You also don't have like what I like to call like hidden costs. So if you imagine hosting a website on a DigitalOcean droplet, you are responsible for making sure that thing's up to date. You have to go in and keep an eye on it every month. With the CDN, you don't really need to do that. When you think of the performance, especially if you're working with something on a global scale, so you might see when you start looking into Jamstack, if you haven't already, you'll see like a lot of big names are starting to use it, a lot of enterprise level. And I think it's mainly because of the global distribution side of things. So when you host your website or a Jamstack site, you should ideally host it on a global CDN, something like Amazon S3, or if you use these services like Versal or Netlify, they kind of do it for you. And the idea behind that is that, depending on where you are in the world, you will be pointed to the nearest node that you were closest to. So instead of having to spin up loads of different machines across the world and passing load balancers to manage load and things like that, the CDN will just kind of do it for you. So a customer might not be too bothered about that, maybe more of like a technical perspective, but the minute you say, well, I can reduce my costs because I don't need to manage this kind of stuff, then that's probably where they start to see things. It's the battle is to try and convert those, like avoid talking about the technical aspects and start thinking about the business value. What kind of business value can you give to the customer, I would say, which is really, really hard, or at least I find that really hard. I'm not really like a sales guy. I'm very much a developer at heart, so I get really excited about this technical stuff, but yeah, I find it quite hard to convey that sometimes. But yeah, there's a couple of good blogs that I would suggest for like looking into this kind of stuff. There's a website called, I think it's Bejamas. I can't really pronounce it right. BEJAMAS. amas.io, and the a cracking company from Poland, Jamstack agency, but their blog is full of insights and information, and it's really nice. So I would definitely have a look at that if, like, you know, you've got like questions around commercial stuff. And Snipcart have a blog post kicking around as well, about this kind of stuff, and they talk about what I tried to get to there as well, about the idea of taking those technical benefits and then converting them into business value. So definitely have a look at those, and that'll probably make the penny drop for you.
Good answer. Good answer. And that's true. Business value is always how you get these things in the door, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Technical side of things isn't the point of it. And hey,
No,
there's a lot of value in crossing that divide, right?
It's quite nice when you speak to a client who has done the research. So rather than you having to sell them the Jamstack, they've come to you and said, I like this Jamstack thing. I just need to find someone to help me do it. It really makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
You can kind of piggyback on those the big companies who are now sort of helping promote this for us.
Yeah.
So there was another question from Kev as well. He's asking, have you had any legal issues with using the sensor data? He said he's heard people have hacked their sensors to upload info and got legal challenges. Has that been something that's come across your radar?
Not for me, but there is another open source project, and this might be what it was. Kev, wasn't it? That might be what that might be what Kev's referring to here. Night Scout, I think the project's called. It's a fantastic project, and it's one of the guys that's kind of the forefront behind it is a man called Scott Hanselman, and I'd say he's like probably a big inspiration to me. He's a developer as well, also a diabetic. He works for Microsoft, but he's like very much behind this whole idea of like, hacking your hardware to make the most out of it. But what he wants to get out of it is like, he's just trying to make a difference with regards to, you know, with diabetes and the internet of things and stuff like that. But yeah, I think with Night Scout, what that kind of relies on is that you effectively modify something on these machines. And then what you can do is you can basically like publish the data. When I was talking about the data from a CGM to the pump, you can publish the data from a CGM to like an Android phone. And then that will then send a REST API call to a service, so you can get like a real-time graph. It's really smart, but yes, absolutely, you can come across like legal issues behind it. So what happens in America, where I think that a lot of this happens, is they'll go on websites like Craigslist and eBay and stuff like that, and they'll buy secondhand insulin pumps and then just do it that way because it's out of warranty. So that tends to be the way to do it. And then on the Night Scout, I'm just going to double check I'm saying the right thing there. I think it's Night Scout, but on the website, yes, it is Night Scout. Nightscout.info is the website. On their site, they give you like a couple of how-to guides for how to do certain things. Now, in terms of our application, there's no legal impact with regards to hardware collaboration because we're not doing that at the moment. At the moment, what you're doing is you're doing a blood test and then you're putting it in yourself. Much like what you would do with something like MyFitnessPal for like nutrition tracking. However, when I did my talk at Jamstack Conf earlier this year, there were a few people that started coming up saying, how do I know my data is protected? Does the data conform to this particular Protection Act? I can't remember what it was called. No, it's gone. It was some kind of like official, I suppose it's like the equivalent of the DPA Act over here, but for medical data in the American.
Because it's medical data, I suppose perhaps it's even more strict than just general.
Yeah, that's right. But what Hey Sugar does give you is the ability to like anonymize it. So it's down to you at the end of the day if you want to put the information on there, and you don't have to display your name on the dashboard. So, you know, there's ways around it, and you also don't have to host it on Netlify. So if you want to keep it behind a private server, then there would be nothing stopping you from doing that. Although it's not documented in the system, like the idea behind it is that it should be open and things like that. But yeah, I don't have like a proper legal answer for that one, I'm afraid. This is all based off my assumptions, so I'm kind of just rolling with it for now.
Yeah. If it comes up, I'm sure it'll come up.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Yeah,
permission forgiveness, isn't it? We did have one extra question, well, a compliment and then a question,
Okay.
which is around the design, a stunning looking application. Just a question about perhaps whether or not you used a framework, possibly recognized some Tailwind in there maybe?
Yeah, so I did spin that up with Tailwind because of for fast prototyping really. And I think the table, I might have done a cheeky copy and paste from Tailwind UI's website because they do have a couple of UI components that you can grab. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier in the talk, this thing's very much like a proof of concept. But if that, you know, the dreams to obviously make it into this kind of like charitable product, if that ever became a thing, then I'll probably look at formulating my own design system and things like that for it. But for right now, we just need to get something working. So Tailwind's awesome for that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I've recently converted, Sean, perhaps, possibly, but then I think you might have converted back, maybe.
I mean, Tailwind is a
knows,
journey. Tailwind is a
knows?
journey.
Yeah,
It's a hilly road.
Even the creator, even Adam Wathan himself said, "Oh yeah, no, it's impossible to see Tailwind for the first time and think that's a good idea." But then you try it, and you're like, "Oh, okay, this makes me really fast." Once I've learned the kind of formula of these little things,
yeah, that was the hardest bit I found with it, was like trying to remember things and you know, getting a line center and justify center wrong, whichever way around it is, that sort of thing.
I do that in CSS though.
I was going to say, I think the problem is because you know it in CSS. You're like, I know this in CSS. I could just do this. I could just do it. But whereas you have the same learning curve with something like Bootstrap or anything.
No one gets align items, justify items.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Right, the first time. I mean, that's probably nonsense. They probably do. There are probably people who are very good at that sort of thing, but I still muddle them up every time.
What was really good to hear in the most recent release for Tailwind is that they've taken care of like the automatic purging, because beforehand you used to have to deal with that yourself. So that makes it a little bit more appealing, like for production ready sites, because it'll automatically get rid of all the guff that you don't need. So yeah, I don't know, I'm warming to it, but I was very much like, what on earth are you doing?
Yeah.
Why not just write CSS? But yeah, like I did it for this, and I couldn't believe how quick I had the site up and running. So yeah, it made sense.
It's almost dangerous how quickly these tools make you, and I think it almost follows on. It works well with the Jamstack stuff because they just make, I don't know about whether you feel this, but it's quite empowering. You know, you can do so many things.
Yeah, well,
with this central stack, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I might have covered in the like in the talk brief that I sent to you, is that, like, you know, I kind of want people to take this away and think that it's not just a farce. It's not like a new thing that's going to disappear. Like it's quite a serious architecture, and there's nothing like particularly new about it. Like if you think about it, you know, the idea of just using JavaScript and markup for a front end, we're probably taking a step back if anything. But yeah, I agree. You know, one thing that I like to do with Jamstack applications is to make use or to leverage from like third-party specialists. So like, you know, Sanity are obviously really good at managing structured content, so they're probably going to be my go-to for things like CMSs and you know, even crazy little projects like this. I've recently been doing some work with Auth0 on a project. I found that a little bit of a challenge though. So it just seems like, it seems great to a point, and then I feel like I'm finding myself going into a big wormhole of stuff. And I think that's probably my only, that's probably my only downside with some of these things. And one thing I probably would say, like maybe just as a word of caution with certain sites, like if you've got like the sort of general kind of like market insight, it's not going to be so much of a problem. But if you're looking to build like a fully fledged application that's purely driven off these third-party systems, you find that you've got a lot of moving parts. Like I don't think you can really avoid that, and especially if they're all interlinked. So if you've got like one system that's going to go down, then that's going to have a knock-on effect on your app. And like in a recent project I've been working on, like we've got Stripe Auth0, we've got content management stuff going on, we've got SendGrid going for transactional emails. So like there's like a handful of different systems that work at once, and it gets a little bit like you've got to try and remember where you are sometime. and I think that's probably been the only time where I've ever sat there and thought like, oh, I could really do with like a monolith right now, just so it's
Yeah,
there.
right. It's like I can just log into the server and poke stuff around in the database.
but I think
on the plus side, someone else gets paid to fix the problems with those third-party
there you go.
services.
Yeah.
You don't have to get up in the middle of the night and log into a remote Linux box and try and solve some weird problem that you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, and that's it. And like, you know, I'm no back-end developer, so the idea of writing an authentication service from the ground up is just impossible for me. So like, it's nice to do it, but it has made me think about maybe looking at some of these frameworks like Laravel. I've got friends who are PHP developers, and they kind of like stand by the fact that you can get APIs up and running really quick with that. And I think that's just sort of like, in recent weeks, that made me think like, oh, maybe I should just try it and just see like how hard it actually is. Because if all I want is this very simple authentication microservice, like, do I really need to use a third party to do that, or can I get something up and running equally as quick? And yeah, I don't know.
Like, but then you're on, you know, it's a risk, isn't it? I suppose it's like crypto. Don't roll your own crypto. Don't roll your own user authentication. One thing I would say on that, have a look at blitz.js.
Blitz.js.
Have you seen that yet? It's like a new full stack framework, React based, but that incorporates Prisma for the data layer.
Oh, brilliant! I'll have a look at that. I've been trying to keep my eye on the Redwood as well.
So it's like Redwood, but better in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. I'll certainly
built on top of Next.js. But yeah, I mean, it's I'm sure they're both good.
Yeah, there's lots of different systems and frameworks coming out the woodwork now. It's an exciting time for development, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a good time to lots of new stuff. But hey, a lot of the criticism that comes in is not to forget that it's all for the user, right? It's all for the end user in the end. And the dev tools can be fun, but they aren't the be all end all. It's always worth remembering, I suppose, when we're talking about these these new tools.
Yeah, and I guess whilst we're on the topic of these third-party services, one more like quick plug I'd like to put in is something called Userbase. I've not used it yet. Pardon the pun. But my wife is a nutrition coach, and we're trying to look at ways to kind of like digitize her business a little bit more. Like at the moment, she's having to chase payments off people over text message and stuff. And I was like, well, why aren't we on Stripe, like setting you up with subscriptions, because she charges monthly. And then I found out recently that Userbase have got a Stripe integration now, so you can apply that in as like a package. So Userbase is sort of like Auth0, but probably what I needed for this job that I was on about now, just something pretty bare bones and straightforward. But it also gives you like other tables and things that you can store data with. So yeah, that's probably something worth having a look at if you're ever looking at this idea of like authentication and payment integrated into it as well.
Yeah, that's really good. It's really good. Are you concerned about some of these services just shutting down one day and saying, "Hi, we've sold to Facebook," and they've switched it off?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're ever going to consider, like, so for me, if I'm putting together like a plan or like an architecture for a project, and I'm looking at some of these services, I tend to reach out to them and ask like how, not to put a damper on anything, but what happens if you like shut down tomorrow? Like, what happens to my data? That sort of thing. And you can kind of gauge from the response like what they're going to do. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in a few years' time. And as you say, if there was like a merger where the original founders have like lost whatever responsibility they had or whatnot, that's obviously always a risk. But yeah, with a lot of these things, like a lot of these new things that come out, I try and like give it a year or so before getting on board with it. Sanity was a bit of an exception though, because I just really enjoyed using it from the get-go. But they're just a really good company. I mean, like, they do a lot for the community, and that tells me that like they put the community first rather than themselves first, which is always like a nice thing to look out for. Another company I've had a little look at was called Jexia. They're like a serverless platform similar to Firebase and things like that, and they're quite similar. Pretty small, quite new, I think. But certainly one to maybe just dabble in and keep an eye out, because I think their product's got legs when it's matured a bit more.
Interesting.
yeah, we're going to have all this all over again. It's just like JavaScript frameworks 5 or 6 years ago, isn't it? It's just going to, new ones every week. And
yeah. It's all about making it so that you can keep up without kind of ruining yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, it's trying to find the ones that are going to mature and stay there and take it from there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Good stuff. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, there's another question. Casual one. Jamie, would you consider using smiley faces to pick your mood? That would be cute. More of a question, less of a question, more of a request, I suppose.
Yeah. I'll bear that in mind.
Yeah. Oh, well, that was really interesting. And yeah, did you say you've had some open source interest and stuff for the project already?
Yeah, so at the moment on the app repo, which all needs to change, there's about 4 repos and it just needs to get thrown into a mono repo, to be honest. There's 29 stars and 2 issues have been raised. Nice. One of them's mine. And then another one was a question about open source device integration and things like that. So that's reminded me, they raised it 2 days ago and I've not been in touch with them, but I've been very busy. I feel bad with this kind of stuff, not getting back to people quick enough, but yeah, so it's nice to see that, like it's not so much a case of people getting on board and saying like, oh, this is what's wrong with the app. It's like, it's suggestions from the get-go and it's more like discussion, and I quite like it. So yeah, definitely getting the interest that I would like. Yeah,
that's really cool. Well, hopefully it goes, kind of catches on. How are you promoting it? Where are you promoting it? Oh, well, I mean, obviously you're here promoting it effectively
well, talks at the moment, and trying to find some more time to invest into it. We've had a bit of a crazy month with work, especially with furloughs going on. All the clients have sort of like come back at once, so it's been a bit of a backlog. But yeah, I would like to, in the coming months, try and invest a bit more time onto it, and then trying to push it mainly through like speaking and stuff like that. I think that's probably the best platform to do it on, really, because you kind of have to like raise the awareness of the disease and talk about that first beforehand. But yeah, so on that, thanks very much for having us today, and it's always a pleasure. It was really good last time I spoke for you, so I enjoyed that. So it's nice to come back.
No, yeah, glad to have you, man. It's been a few months now, I suppose. Feels like a lifetime, of course. Since
it was like the week before the country turned upside down, I think.
It was, yeah. I think we may have been the last major event to take place in the city. Really. It was kind of crazy. Here we are. But no, that was really interesting. I'm very excited by the Jamstack approach, and it's useful to see a really kind of concrete example of how it can be used to kind of be empowering for people and allow people to just kind of click a button and be like, okay, now you've got an app, go and use it, track your stuff, and hopefully help improve your health. Like, that's really valuable.
Yeah, I think when that sanity template's sorted, I think that's when it will really start to take on a little bit. But one thing that I am aware of is that, like, we're talking about this idea of locking people in and the things built around like 2 particular technologies. So but I guess this is where that sort of like future iteration of the project comes in. If there's a way that we can maybe deal with that on the not self-hosted version, I don't know, up in the air.
I guess there's all sorts of options, isn't there? Really, could be different hosting options, different from the managed version to the run it yourself on a private server behind a big secure firewall because you really want to protect your data for whatever reason.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
It'd be nice to do all of them, and this technology does allow that flexibility. I guess you don't you have to have a server with a database with this. It's like, oh, you can kind of use these things around it, and you could host I don't know, I'm rambling, but yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Well, I can't see any more questions coming in, so I guess we'll move to wrap it up there. And thanks very much, Jamie. That was really cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having us, and enjoy your evening, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Jamie. That was great.
Nice one. Well, hey everyone, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and tap the bell. Right, tap the bell. Down there or down there? Down there. I don't know. Just because we're on YouTube, I thought might as well do that. All right, nice one. Have a good evening, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you again next time.